Should be recording soon as well. Okay, well, before I let you know what we're going to learn about today, let's begin with our prayer. Father Isaac, if you wouldn't mind letting people in, just so that I don't have to jump screens. Okay, let's begin with our prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Illumine our hearts, O Master, who loves mankind, with the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds to understand your gospel teachings. Implant also in us the fear of your most blessed commandments, so that trampling down all carnal desires, we may enter upon a spiritual manner of living, both thinking and doing such things that are well pleasing unto thee. For you are the illumination of our souls and bodies, O Christ our God, and unto thee do ascribe all glory, together with your fathers from everlasting, and your all holy and good and life-creating Spirit, now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Okay, welcome everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. We won't have slides, so for this particular series of catechesis lessons, we won't have slides as usual. We're just going to be discussing the very famous book by St. John of the Ladder of Divine Ascent. And we've only just begun. Last week we began the first rung, the first step of the ladder, which was the renunciation of the world. And you might be thinking, okay, well, what's the next step? And the next step is something very similar. Can anyone tell me?
Detachment.
Detachment. That's the general title of the next step. So you think, well, didn't we just speak about detachment? Last time, isn't that what renouncing the world is? But St. John, being an abbot, having known many young men who left the world to become monastics in Sinai, he understood that just by renouncing the world was not the final step, it was just the beginning. And what he noticed was, and what he points out in his second step, is that although we may renounce the world, we may walk away from it, what we tend to do is we carry it with us. We carry the world in our hearts. We spoke last time about the world being we understand when we speak about the world as the fallen world, that which is perishing, that which is not eternal. And that's the thing that we renounce and walk away from towards the heavenly kingdom, the eternal kingdom of God that he has prepared for us. But the danger is that we carry certain things with us that become idols to us. We become so attached to them, and they actually drag us down on our spiritual journey, our spiritual struggle towards the heavenly kingdom. And so John speaks about this. So I'm not going to quote from the whole step, obviously, because it's a lot of text to read, but I'm going to read some parts for you and look at some other texts from the scriptures, from the words of Christ himself, and also from the Desert Fathers and some other sources. So let me read how St. John opens the second step of the ladder. Okay, on detachment. He says this: the man who really loves the Lord, who has made a real effort to find the coming kingdom, who has really begun to be troubled by his sins, who is really mindful of eternal torment and judgment, who really lives in fear of his own departure, will not love, care, or worry about money, or possessions, or parents, or worldly glory, or friends, or brothers, or anything at all on earth. But having shaken off all ties with earthly things, and having stripped himself of all his cares, and having come to hate even his own flesh, and having stripped himself of everything, he will follow Christ without anxiety or hesitation, always looking heavenward and expecting help from there. So that's how John begins. So he's now saying the person who takes this journey seriously, he will learn to put the love of God above everything. Money, possessions, family, worldly glory, that's also something very important. We somehow feel that often gets left behind. We want to leave a legacy at least of some kind of glory here on this earth. Even that, he says, we must give up. right? And the interesting thing is that he ends off saying that if we have done this, if we have shaken off all these things, that we cling onto, we will follow Christ without anxiety or hesitation. And uh, many times in the second step, John speaks about how this path, the path of detachment, removes anxiety. And I can't help but think about our own age and how much anxiety there is. I feel it myself, but many, many people struggle with anxiety. And I wonder if it isn't connected to our materialist worldview. Even if we say we're Christians, we often still adopt a materialist kind of view where we cling on to things of this world, even though they are not eternal. And we have so much anxiety. So I think that, um, as far as the world has drifted from this way of life, so has anxiety increased, I would say. And so there's something for us to learn in the second step about how we can truly rid ourselves of anxiety. And that comes with shedding our worries and cares and trying to possess the things of this earth. He goes on to say a little bit later these words, which I think is quite beautiful. He says this: after our call, the Christian call to follow Christ, which comes from God and not man. So it's a God call, God's call to us. Just like Jesus came and he began to call his disciples, God calls every one of us. I think many of us we should really recognize that voice that led us to the church, that voice that led us in every one of us has a unique journey towards Christ. That was a call from God, and we shouldn't underestimate that. We shouldn't just think that was us coming to some conclusion, that we should, become Orthodox Christians or whatever it may be. That's really God's call. Christ calls each one of us just like he called the disciples. And so this is what he says. After our call, which comes from God and not man, we have left all that is mentioned above. And then he says, and it is a great disgrace for us to worry about anything that cannot help us in the hour of our need. That is to say, the hour of our death. So he's saying, we shouldn't answer the call, start to follow Christ, but then we begin, as we journey, to start worrying about things. What are we going to do? How are we going to make lots of money? How are we going to get well known or a reputation and all these things? And he says it's a great disgrace because none of these things can help us in the hour of our need. That's a nice way of saying that the time when we face death. Now, some people say, well, that's very, macabre and negative to say, we should be constantly thinking about death. But this is actually the Christian tradition, is to contemplate our own death, because we come to our death like we came into this life. We are born and, with nothing. We're born naked, crying, come just from the mother's womb. We own nothing, possess nothing. That's pretty much that's how we go in death as well. We take nothing of this world with us in our death. And so if we have put all our hope, all our attention, all our efforts into those things, then what a terrible death, because we're going to be separated from those things. And so he's saying it's a disgrace when we worry about these things, and we should be worrying about Christ. And when I don't mean worry, but I mean we should be focused and dedicated to Christ, because he is the one that we will stand before in the hour of our need. And this is important. So the contemplation of death is mingled with joy, because we anticipate coming into the fullness of our experience with God and our communion with God and one another in that experience. And so it's mingled with joy. So it's not a kind of a dark thing and a depressing thing, but it is the truth. And I think that's important, is that we need to understand that we take nothing with us to our grave. Nothing. Our beautiful coffin made of oak and with beautiful brass handles, we don't take with us, right? So even the things that come with us in the grave, we don't take with us. So something for us to remember. Now we may say, oh, but John is an extreme monk, right? He's telling his monks, don't, give up your parents, give up your worldly possessions, all these things. But that's for monks. Well, John is really just quoting Christ. Christ himself was very, very clear when he called his disciples that to be a true disciple, you had to give up everything to follow him. And I'll read from Luke's Gospel in the 14th chapter how Jesus says this. When the multitudes were following him, he says this. Well, it says this. Now great multitudes went with him. So many, many people are following him. He's working miracles. He's, healing people. He's feeding people. He's, this is amazing. The Messiah, possibly, everyone wants to come and see. Then he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Very strong words. Christ often uses very strong words. Yes, it is hyperbolic in the sense that he's using an extreme word like hate. Same thing, it says, if your hand causes you to sin, chop it off. It's hyperbolic language, but it's very serious language. We shouldn't underestimate and say, well, it's all metaphorical. He's truly saying we need to prioritize our love for God first and not be attached to anything, even the most closest people to us. And he continues, for which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Unless after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation to ask conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. Those are two interesting parables. The one about building a house or building a structure, and the other one is waging a war. We should first be ready to complete this task and have the resources we have so that we don't start something and not finish it correctly. So it's interesting, and he says, he finishes it off with this. Likewise, whoever does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. So these parables are related to forsaking everything. So Christ is saying, yes, you've become my disciple, but now are you willing to build your house till the end, or build your ladder to divine ascent to the end? If you would like to do that, you need to give up everything. The cost of becoming Jesus' disciple is our life. We have to give our whole life unto Christ our God, as we say many times in the Divine Liturgy, right? What does this mean with our relationship within our mother, father, wife, children, brothers, sisters, and our own life also? Jesus is not saying that these things are bad, but he's showing us that we need to establish a hierarchy of worship, of dedication, and of course he gives us the commandment to honor our mother and father, to love our neighbor as ourselves. But that love can never be greater than our love for God, because our love for God is the source of our love for everyone else. And we'll talk about that a bit later, but that's important to understand. So it's a bit paradoxical, because you've got to detach yourself in order to have a better relationship, in a sense. When you're attached to something, it's actually you're trying to rather, let's say this: when you try to possess something, you actually cannot love it in the most perfect way possible. And so, in a way, Christ is teaching us how to truly love our neighbor by first relinquishing it, dedicating our life to God, and then all those relationships start falling into place. Okay, let's continue. St. John also mentions in the second step, He mentions the meeting between Jesus Christ and the young rich man. This is what St. John says. He says, "Let us listen to what the Lord said to the young man who had fulfilled nearly all the commandments. But Jesus said, 'One thing you lack. Sell what you have and give to the poor, and become a beggar who receives alms from others.'" So John is paraphrasing here, but he's driving it home that this young man, um, he was basically perfect. Almost. He had fulfilled all the commandments, he says, from his youth. So he had, lived them his whole life. And then Jesus says, if you will be perfect, sell everything you have, give to the poor. And Jesus says directly, the quote is, "And you will have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me." So be my disciple. And it says in the gospel, "But when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions." Interesting, the word possessions. He was possessed by his possessions. He didn't want to relinquish them for Christ. We obviously, we have a bit better perspective. We say, how could he could have been one of the, we would have known his name. We don't even know his name now. He's lost in history. We know he almost became a disciple, but he was too connected to his worldly possessions. And you know where those possessions are now? They crumbled into dust somewhere in Israel. And they were plundered and scattered all over the earth or whatever, but they no longer have value now. But to him, that was everything. So he is a great example for us of of course it is the right thing to follow Christ. And I think one of the things why John says, paraphrase Jesus saying, "Sell what you have, give to the poor, and come and become a beggar who receives alms from others," because Jesus was also wanted to teach this man humility, right? There's a certain pride that he had everything. Everything was put together nicely. He was a righteous man. He was wealthy. He was good. In his estimation, and Jesus wanted him to learn how to receive, to learn how to be at God's mercy, and not rely on his own possessions. Right? So he lost it. The Old Testament as well is full of these lessons about how when we follow a path, when we are led by God to a particular place, we shouldn't look back. Of course, we have the famous story of Lot's family. I'll read that for you. This is now the angels leading Lot and his family out of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So that's going to be destroyed. I'll read it for you because it's very dynamic part of Genesis. It says, when morning came, the angels told Lot to hurry. They said, "Get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or else you will be destroyed when the city is punished." But Lot was slow to move, so the men took him, his wife, and his 2 daughters by the hand and brought them out of the city. For the Lord had loving pity for him. When they had brought them out of the city, one of them said, "Run for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stop until you're out of the valley. Run to the mountains, or else you will be destroyed." But Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lord, see, your servant has found favor in your eyes. You have shown me great kindness in what you have done for me by saving my life. But I cannot run to the mountains, for I will run into danger and die. See, this town is near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me run there, and my life will be saved." And the angel said to him, "See, I am doing what you ask. I will not destroy this town that you have spoken about. Hurry and run there, for I cannot do anything until you get there." And then it goes on to say, so the name was given to the town of Zoar. And then it says, the sun had moved over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord poured fire from the heavens upon Sodom and Gomorrah, and he destroyed those cities and all the valley and all the people of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him turned and looked towards the cities, and she was changed into salt. This famous story we know, we don't know why she turned. But the ultimate meaning is, apart from maybe curiosity, Lot's wife was looking back. She was not focused on the path of salvation that the angels were leading her on. And this in itself kills us. It destroys us because we haven't well, we're faltering. And the same thing can be said with the Israelites when they were led out of Egypt. Now, there's an interesting part in Exodus when the Israelites were basically finally allowed to leave after the firstborn sons were punished of the Egyptians. Um, it says that the Egyptians gave them their gold and the Israelites took their gold from them. Now, there is some exegesis on that means that when we leave our old life, we should take the things that are valuable from our previous life, and that is true. But ultimately, what happened with that gold? Can anyone tell me what did they do with that gold when they went into Sinai? After they passed the Red Sea,
They made a gold calf.
they made a gold calf from it. So you can also, also look at that instance of they took the things from Egypt, they didn't cast them down, and ultimately they brought the idolatry of Egypt into Sinai when Moses was on the mountain and he had left him for some time. And so this is the danger of carrying the world, being possessed by possessions, is that they destroy you. Just like Lot's wife looking back at her old life, or like the Israelites misusing the gold of the Egyptians, to just basically enter again into a type of idolatry. Okay. And there's many cases of that, in the Old Testament. Was there a question? I heard a little. If anyone has a question, you're welcome to immediately just push your microphone. You can ask. Yeah, because I can't see the screen.
Nina, go ahead.
Yes, yeah, please do ask.
Hello. So it's a pretty off-topic question. But could you pray for me because I'm having a hard time with headaches.
Absolutely. I mean, anything that's more personal, we can talk about afterwards. But of course, I'll say for you, Nina.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's continue with John's second step. Talking about anxiety. So a couple of things that I thought really resounded with me. He said this. John said, "The man who has come to hate the world has escaped sorrow, but he who has an attachment to anything visible is not yet delivered from grief. And if anyone thinks he is without attachment to some object, but is grieved at its loss, then he is completely deceiving himself." So if we lose something and we are grieved by it, then we're still deceiving ourselves to think that we're not attached to things. So this can be maybe a lesson for us. One thing I have noticed in my own life, when I was kind of just becoming a Christian in my teens, and I was one of those people very into little trinkets and symbols and stuff, and I had my little bracelet with all my sentimental things, my little crosses and little charm bracelet basically, that was very dear to me, and because of all the like little history, someone gave me this and I have this little thing, and then I went to the beach or something and it fell off my wrist and it was gone. And it was a really good experience for me because I was really upset and I was digging in the sand for it and I was looking for this little thing, and I realized, I have a cross on my neck. What am I doing with this little like charm bracelet? And I think oftentimes God, we experience losses. That's a small loss. Okay, we experience big losses as well in our life, family members, jobs, income, all these things. We experience loss and we grieve for it. And I think we should take John's words here into our hearts and realize that if we were detached from these things, if we weren't so possessed by them, we wouldn't have so much grief over it, and we would be a lot more liberated in this life. And part of the Christian way from the very beginning was to develop a sense of detachment. Because it is true. It is true. You take nothing with you to the grave of worldly things. We should be storing up our treasure in heaven, as Christ says. Our virtues, our good works, our love of God, those things remain. Those things are eternal. Those things we can store. We cannot store anything of this world. Let's read from the Desert Fathers. The Desert Fathers, I would say, become the great example for us of how to achieve detachment. And a lot of the things they say we can apply in our own life, even if we don't live in the Egyptian desert. Let's read from Abba Zosimos. Abba Zosimos said, "In time, through neglect, we lose even the little fervor that we suppose we have in our ascetic renunciation. We become attached to useless, insignificant, and entirely worthless matters, substituting these for the love of God and neighbor, appropriating material things as if they were our own, as if we had not received them from God. What do you have that you do not receive? And if you received it, then why do you boast as if it were not a gift?" What a good perspective. He says everything we have has been given to us, ultimately, right? Even if we earned it in our job, let's just say, or whatever. Ultimately, God has given us everything. Our life, the world, everything we see has been given to us by God. We have received it as a gift. And so we should not be grieved if that gift gets taken away from us, because we didn't earn that. Yes, is there a question?
There's a question in the chat from Jacques.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to read it, Jacob?
I'll read it for you, Father.
Okay, thank you, Isaac.
He asks, is that also why the funeral of monastic, is that why their faces are covered, because they are detached from the world and dead to the world? And that's the question.
That's a good question. I actually don't know. Yes, there is a tradition in the Christian practice to cover the face, especially monastic face, but not necessarily also, at least partially, a person has a prayer placed on their forehead in their funeral. But yes, monastics' faces are covered. Probably, yeah, it symbolizes they are dead to the world. A monastic shroud that is placed over their face, it looks like those symbols that are seen on a schema monk, which basically is the cross, basically, and its instruments, but that represents death to the world. And so I actually bought someone one of those as a gift. If they weren't Orthodox, I would think that's a very strange gift, but it basically, yeah, represents death to the world. So I'm pretty sure, yeah, that's what it means. But I actually haven't thought about that. Another thing I can say that's interesting, speaking about Abazosimos, he's saying, we become attached to useless, insignificant, and entirely worthless matters. So it's not necessarily only material things, but especially when we start in the Christian life, even in the parish life, never mind the monastery, in the parish life, we get really caught up on little details. This person did this, or this person didn't do this, or and we get so upset and attached to these things that are all passing away. And we start to focus and hyper focus on these things as if that's everything, and that is a real danger, especially in the everyday church life, to get too attached to worldly matters. I'm definitely that's a problem I have to deal with all the time. But it's something we need to check ourselves on often. Okay, let's read some more from the Desert Fathers. It says this: a brother was leaving the world, just like we are now endeavoring to do, to leave the world, as John has called us in the Lad of Divine Ascent. And though he gave his goods to the poor, he kept some for his own use. A kind of, safekeeping for a rainy day type of thing. And he went to Anthony, this is Anthony the Great, and when Anthony knew what he had done, he said, "If you want to be a monk, go to the village over there, buy some meat, and hang it on your naked body and come back here. Okay. And he did it because obedience was a big thing. So Anthony told him to literally buy meat, hang it over his naked body, and come back to Anthony. The brother went, and dogs and birds tore at his body. He came back to Anthony, who asked him if he had done what he had told, and he showed him his torn body, so they'd bitten him and things. Then Anthony said, "Those who renounce the world but want to keep their money are attacked in that way by demons and torn in pieces." So Anthony, in his wisdom, knew that if one was to renounce the world, they should not take even a part of it with them. That's going to be the thing that through that the demons will attack that person by being attached to it. Yeah. Now, a lot of you are saying, "Okay, Father, so what are you saying? We have to literally just walk around naked and not have anything." That's not what I'm saying. What we see is that we cannot have attachment to these things. So, you can have a very wealthy person who makes, let's just say, a good income. He has, let's just say, but that income is constantly flowing out of them. They're not attached to it. Well, you can get someone who has very little, but they're so obsessed with that little nest egg that they've got that it absolutely consumes them, and they're so afraid to go out in the world because they might lose it or whatever. So the key here is attachment to things. The world is a gift, and we trade in it, and we work in it, and we engage in these things, but we should have a right relationship with these things and not be possessed by them and not be attached to them. We receive them freely, and freely we give them. Right? That's the key of this step, especially for us who are not monastics.
Question from Tom.
Yes, Tom?
Father Nicholas, I have a question about how to apply this in my own life.
Yeah.
I work in sales, and of course there's a huge emphasis on, in terms of a metric for success on monetary, cash collected, etc. And we're all in sales because of certain aspirations to be successful, of course. Now, are those things mutually exclusive? As an aspiration to be a man of means inherently a bad thing, or how would I balance that?
Well, so one of the things that helped me see perspective to that is in the wedding prayers in the crowning service. So generally, a crowning service is not it's not a monastic tonsure. It's the martyrdom of a man and a woman together. That is what it means. But part of the prayers is that so that their storehouses may be filled, and so that they may provide for others. So there's actually a prayer for their wealth and success, but not so that they may be attached to it, because ultimately they will have to let go of it sometime. So I think that don't be possessed by this desire to be a man of means and receive a status for it, because then that's I think when it'll be spiritually detrimental to us, and that's when our pride and all these things will, or our shame, if it doesn't work out, that also is a big thing. If we strive our whole life to be rich and wealthy and have a lot of expendable income and all these things, and we don't make it, but that's all we've been focused on, that's also a terrible life, in a way. So I think on a personal level, I think we should strive to be good at what we do, and ultimately there's nothing wrong if you strive to be successful, but don't be possessed by it. And there's many ways that you can liberate yourself, by not being how can I say, miserly, and I don't want to use the word stingy, I don't think it's the right word, but like not hoarding and clothes, and see it as a gift, ultimately. And many, like I've met many people that are really generous and they're not attached to their goods, and they have this kind of sense that it is a gift that they have received, and so they use it as a gift and not as a kind of as something that possesses them. So you have to find a balance, but they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, many of us, I think we need to. I think that's probably why generally most of the I mean, apart from economics, God allows most of us to kind of struggle with money. Because it's good for us. It's good for our salvation, really, that we struggle through this because and worry about money and not have just total, because we'll become so attached to our wealth. If we were all super wealthy, that becomes everything. We get obsessed with it. So God takes it away from us to make sure we don't get too attached, and we start thinking about other things that are more important. I think that's the case. So let's continue reading, because I think this is on that point actually that you spoke about, which is doing good in the world for vainglory. Actually, that's exactly what we're talking about. So something this is very insightful what John saw in some of the monastics. He said this: it is worth investigating why those who live in the world and spend their lives in vigils, fasts, labors, and hardships, when they withdraw from the world and begin the monastic life, as if at some trial or on the practicing ground, no longer continue the discipline of their former spurious and sham asceticism. How interesting. So he's saying that there were many people who they lived in the world, Christians, they were still doing vigils, they still have vigils in church, even in parishes, fasting, labors, hardships, but when they withdrew from the world, there's no place for glory. There's no vainglory. There's no boasting, because there's no one to boast in front of. Then everything falls flat. And he says there was just sham asceticism that they were doing. Look how I stand at vigils. Look how I, do these labors and all these things. But when there's no one to watch in the monastery, then suddenly they can't. They don't have the energy. And then he continues and says this very nice imagery. He says, I have seen how in the world they planted many different plants of the virtues, which were watered by vainglory as by an underground sewage pipe, and were hoed by ostentation, so tilled by ostentation, and for manure were heaped with praise. But when transplanted to the desert soil, inaccessible to people of the world, and so not manured with the foul-smelling water of vanity, they withered at once. For water-loving plants are not such as to produce fruit in hard and arid training fields. So how interesting is that? That his insight is that many of us, we can do lots of good works and virtues, but we have to have it. It has to be affirmed by, our ego has to be affirmed by others in the world. And this is why it's so important to detach ourselves from the world. Because if we don't do that, then we can never be sure exactly if the things that we are doing for God are really for God or for our vainglory. And this is another reason why the monastery makes it so apparent, but also why we have to detach. We have to not seek out the worldly side of the worldly glory of these things. And that creeps in definitely for the average Christian going to church and all these things. Yes? Is there a question?
Hi, yes, please.
Yes.
I was wondering what will be the practical ways to actually detach ourselves from families or children, or what the things.
Okay, so for example, children. This is a very important thing. Now we think that why is God asking me to detach myself from my child? But we actually see that some of the worst relationships that exist between a mother or father and their child is when they hold on to the children too much. So, and that can take place in like what we call helicopter parenting, where a parent will make sure that child never falls, never scratches his knee, never goes out into the world, and hold him so close, so attached to that child that child is actually he doesn't develop his own character and his own and he doesn't learn from his own experiences, right? It can go even further when a child grows to adulthood. The parents must let go of that child. Whether they like it or not, that child will leave the nest. And that's often when parents have an absolute, how can I say, it's what's they call empty nest syndrome. And that can be a very difficult time for parents because they become so attached to their children. Now, it doesn't mean that we should ever stop loving our children. In fact, to love our children is to trust them and to give them that freedom to say, go and be free, maybe start your life, and I'm with you and I love you, but you are your person. So that detachment has to actually take place, even in a practical sense. So, and that can be applied in many other ways. So what we mean is that we want to correct the relationship with these things. So, for example, it has to do as well with what a true relationship of love is, right? So if we are, so first of all, our relationship with God and our relationship with everything else. If God is the first cause of love, right? So the world exists because of God's love. That's what we believe as Christians. We believe that God didn't need to create the world. He didn't need to create human beings. There was no necessity for it. So why did he do it? He did it because he wanted to express his wisdom, but also that we would experience his love, and that we could respond to it. So our first response of love is to respond to God's love. And we can only do that if we have a correct relationship with everything else. Because if our love can, if we get, we only love those around us, then we can often, we can focus our love in the wrong direction. And then our love for our husbands, our wives, our children is actually quite limited because it hasn't experienced that perfect relationship of love between man and God. So it's not saying we mustn't love our family members. It's saying that we shouldn't be possessed and attached to them as a crutch, well, I have some good quotes that might help that answer that question a bit later.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So John says, how do we avoid vainglory? The following will show you what the narrow way means. Now he's saying this is what we should do. Mortification of the stomach. So fasting in secrets. What happens in the stomach, only we know, right? All night standing, water in moderation, short rations of bread, purifying draught of dishonor, sneers, derision, insults, the cutting out of one's own will, patience in annoyances, unmurmuring endurance of scorn, disregard of insults, and the habit when wronged of bearing it sturdily, when slandered of not being indignant, when humiliated not to be angry, when condemned to be humble. How this is really where it's all about, what it's all about, we have so much pride and ego, we have all these excuses when someone says something about us, or John is saying this is the best way for us to practice our humility and to show that what we're doing is for the glory of God and not for man's praises. And so many of the saints, they did things that were not recognized as good in their own lifetime. Saint John Chrysostom, for example, was exiled. Meanwhile, we couldn't imagine exiling such a great preacher and bishop, but in his time, many people hated him, and he bore it humbly. He even accepted his exile, even though he was the Archbishop, of Constantinople. Saint John of Shanghai, a more recent saint, he was taken to court. I could be mistaken, but from what I understand, there was some scandal about money being misused in the building of the cathedral, the Joy of All Who Sorrow, and he was taken to court by parishioners Can you imagine? Or something along those lines. And he bore it humbly and patiently. So when people insult us, murmur against us, annoy us, that happens all the time. We should just wait a second and think maybe God is giving us this to teach us humility. Do things not because it makes us, we get praised for it. And that's how you avoid vainglory. Okay. He also gives a word of advice to young people who desire to take up this life of purity and of following God. He says, if young people who are prone to the desires of physical love and to luxurious ways wish to enter the monastic life, he says, let them exercise themselves in all fasting and prayer and persuade themselves to abstain from all luxury and vice. So, if someone is used to this kind of luxurious life, they must be very careful not to carry it with them into the Christian life. There has to be some kind of asceticism. He says, unless their last state be worse than the first. He says, this harbor, the harbor of monasticism, or let's just broaden that and say that, let's just say the Christian life, provides safety, but also exposes one to danger. Those who sail the spiritual seas know this, but it is a pitiful sight to behold those who have survived perils at the sea, but suffering shipwreck in the harbor. So oftentimes, if we don't take the spiritual life seriously, we can actually fall even in a worse place in the Christian life when we don't continue and endure in the right, correct way. And so he uses the image like you've come into the harbor and now your ship sinks there. We don't want that to happen, right? And so we don't want to take the things that were part of our previous life and they shouldn't be stowaways within us, because that'll lead to the sinking of the ship that we're journeying on, right? Okay, so someone sent me a very nice summary of this step, and I wanted to share it with you. I'm going to just read it. So I think it's actually a wonderful way to kind of complete talking about the step, and then we can maybe stay from some questions. So he says this, loving God first maintains the structure of reality, allowing his, so God's, intended flow of love to reach us in all its purity. When we willfully elevate possessions and fellow humans above their station in the hierarchy of love, we create stumbling blocks on the mountain we hope to ascend. To love someone is to strive towards their participation in the good. Participation in the good is to carry our cross up the mountain to inch closer to the source of all good. By creating these stumbling blocks on the path, through our delusion and lack of discernment, we harm our loved one and ourselves. So by being possessed by them, by elevating them to higher than they become stumbling blocks. We stumble on our path towards height, and we ourselves, we harm our loved ones. So then it goes on to quote, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. This is what Christ says. This is what St. John Chrysostom says. This is for the question. He says this, do not let your love of wife or children cause you to forget the love of God. So there should always be a hierarchy. Our love of God should inform how we love our mother, father, whoever. That should be the hierarchy. Detachment is not, this is Saint Elder Sophrony of Essex, or Saint Sophrony of Essex. He says this, detachment is not cold indifference, but a flaming love for God that burns away all that is lesser. I'll read that again. Detachment is not cold indifference. Never think that. He says, detachment is not cold indifference, but a flaming love for God that burns away all that is lesser, not as important. And then Saint Theophan the Recluse says this, a monk must cut off everything that binds him to the world, not because he does not love, but because he seeks a higher love. Right? That's a really nice quote. I'll put them in the. I'll copy them in our chat. And then just final thought from this person who gave this very nice summary. Did all the work for me tonight. When Christ says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. He is speaking to a great multitude who are following him after he performed miracles. Christ knows our heart, and he could see that many of them were only there for the show, but were not serious about carrying their cross to truly become disciples. He knew they would pick their family and friends over the sacrifices they needed to make. He was thinning the crowd, separating the wheat from the chaff, to ensure only those who understood the commitment would continue to follow with the right intentions. He does not mean we should literally hate family and friends, but instead is trying to make the multitude understand that there is a hierarchy of love that must be maintained, upon which all other relationships depend. So I really think that's a wonderful way to see it. Let me put those quotes for anyone who'd like to read them. So I'll give maybe one or two last thoughts before maybe have some questions. Let's look at the concept of love in popular culture, and to see why what we're talking about is really relevant in our life. In a post-Christian or post-religious, let's just say even worldview, our only reference to love is how we experience it, right? And you just switch on the radio and every song is a love song. And every second song is a breakup song. And every third song is a revenge love song or something, right? So it's this terrible reference of love, right? And generally, love has been so, let's just say, degraded, that people have no reference of what true love is. And so when they say, I love my mom, I love my wife, I love my kids, they love them in a very superficial, actually, and not a very sacrificial way. And so when we turn to God and learn from him what true love is, and Christ himself shows us what real love is to co-suffer with one another. That means to take up the sufferings of others and to bear it with them. Love is to sacrifice oneself, to give oneself for the other. And that was ultimately achieved and is achieved in Christ and in his saints. The saints are imitating Christ. This is what true love is. God gave his only begotten son, right? You know, Dmitry Smirnov, a famous Russian priest, once said, he says, go to a Russian prison. I'm paraphrasing, sorry. And look at all the terrible killers, rapists. Which one of you would give your son to free them? You know, no one could do that, you know, yet that's what God did. And it's an amazing act of love that we shouldn't underestimate. So we have to have that as the highest point of love, the highest reference of what love is. Then that trickles down and it helps us to have true sacrificial love for everyone else in our life. And I think this is the most important thing. So let's recap on the second step. We have renounced the world because we know that the world is passing away and the new age is coming that Christ is leading us towards. The eternal life that has no shadow, no darkness, no sighing, no weeping, no evil. We're longing for that and we're on that journey. Let us not take the things that are not compatible, don't have a place in the kingdom of God. Let's not carry them with us, because that will be our downfall. That will be the thing that pulls us back, drags us back to the world, and basically leads us off the path that we should be on. And so in order to do that, we need to engender a kind of hatred for the world, as Christ says, hatred in the sense that I'm not going to let this thing get between me and God. And the paradox is when we do that, our relationship with the world is healed. So we have to also trust God as well in that. You know, I can say personally, like as an artist, when I used to paint a lot and look at the beautiful things of the world, landscaping and portraits and things, you know, you really are inspired by beauty. That became 1,000 times more acute when I had faith in God and as a creator. It becomes even more apparent the beauty of the world, and that I couldn't have had that experience without seeing the beauty of God, our creator. Right. So I think let's wrap it up there. Are there any questions or comments or objections? So remember to switch on your microphones. Okay, nothing. Okay, if there's no questions, then we can wrap it up. Thank you everyone for your attention. We're gonna keep on climbing the ladder. I'll try and make each step one lesson. Of course, I'm summarizing a lot, so please do read the ladder. I did send the text on our group online as a PDF document, or you can buy the book if you like. Don't be discouraged by the difficulty of the text, because it really has something to say to us, all of us Christians, whether we're married or not. I'm a married priest, and yet I love the text and I can apply it as well. And it brings me lots of shame to show how far I am from ascending the ladder that John has given to us. So please, be encouraged by it. Dimitri, I see you have a question. Or are you just saying goodbye?
No, I just wanted to ask. I don't think I'm in the group, and I didn't get that. And also, I wanted to ask: is it possible that we get all these nice quotes that you were reading?
Yes, I did post them now on the chat group, but I can also post them on our WhatsApp group. But how did you find our
Through the
link?
through the Johannesburg group.
Oh, okay, nice. So what I can do is I can send it through there, through Father Daniel. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'll send it through there, and then we can connect it up a bit more.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. Hey, have a blessed evening. It's very nice to have you all on.
One more question, Tom.
Yes,
And Kate.
Isaac. Brother Isaac.
There's a couple of questions from Kaylin and Tom.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes, please do.
Very quickly, Father Nicholas, I'm
Yes.
obviously very new, so you're coming up for Lent and fasting and everything. Is that something that, you would advise that someone do when they first come in to change their diet in the first few weeks of learning about Orthodoxy?
Yeah. So generally, I would say that if a person is quite young and healthy, and I think that we should offer some kind of fasting. We can start immediately. Now, we should be careful. Maybe the Orthodox fasting is not. How can I say? We're allowed to eat during the day, so we don't have like a dry fasting. Only maybe the first day of Lent and Holy Thursday, basically. No, or Holy Friday. Sorry. Are the days when we don't eat anything. But generally, the fasting is meant to be moderate, as in we can eat, but we kind of control the types of food we eat, not because we think it's bad or evil or something. It's generally the richer foods that are luxurious, like meat and dairy. So I would say that try take up a small fasting rule, but also, you have to, I would say, don't be too strict on yourself. So maybe you can give yourself some concessions here and there, but it's important for us to put some effort into the fasting, even if it's just something small for this time around, for this Lent, because we can do it, and especially, I mean, you look a healthy young man, so you can make an offering. Like I see so many people on extreme diets for physical things, for gym or for, I don't know, yoga or whatever, and they put themselves in these very strict diets that are like basically torture, like wheatgrass shots and things, and people manage it. So for Christ, we can offer something, and it corrects our relationship with food. We love food. At the end of Lent at Pascha, we're so looking forward to a boiled egg, when we take it for granted before that. So definitely, try something.
Yeah.
Don't go full on, because then there's pride that can come in, or you can get despondent halfway through, and then
Yeah.
yeah.
No, thank you.
Okay. Isaac, was there another question there?
Yes, from Kaylin.
Yes, Kevin.
Yes. Hello, Father. I hope you guys are all well. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I just wanted to say my mom sent a message onto she wrote a message in the comment section. Should I read it or?
Yes, please do read it. So I'm very bad with the keeping up to date with what's going on the sidebar there.
Oh, okay.
Please do read it.
I can't exactly remember which part it was, but the exact words is kind of like the analogy of the closed hand. A closed hand attached clings to possessions, pride, grudges, people, etc., while an open hand, detached, shares love, mercy, material blessings, etc.
Yeah. If someone, I mean, that's a beautiful image. It's even, the way, kind of like the way we pray, you pray with like open hands. There's even there's a beautiful poem, I can't remember who wrote it, about the Holy Spirit. It's like, when we open our hands towards God, not trying to possess him, he's present in us. But when we try to grab him, to possess him, he's gone. God cannot be possessed, right? And I think that the same thing goes with, anything. We shouldn't, when we try to possess something, we kind of lose it in a way. Like we were talking about children, we don't want to hold on to a child so tight that they're actually not their own person. They're an extension of us, and that's already not love. That's selfishness. We want to hold them into us, and so by letting them go, we actually allow this relationship to actually exist, which is amazing. And so let it be like that. That's, I think, what God is trying to teach us here. Yes, Dimitri.
Dimitri is my husband. I'm Desi. Sorry,
I was going to say. Yes.
Yeah.
What's your name?
Okay. Desi. Desi.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Desi. Okay.
I was thinking, I think I've kind of done this to my children, to both of them, and I see how this has really affected our relationships. What is there, besides repentance, for me to do to actually try to restore this? Like, any practical advice on that?
How old are they?
18 and 24.
Okay, so look, I mean, at that age, our children are naturally wanting to, find their way, but there should always be. So what I say is, you should always leave it's like let's just say, I'll give you an analogy. My mother, she used to live on a farm in Zimbabwe, and she was very she came from Cape Town. She married a farmer, basically an Afrikaans farmer in the far north of Zimbabwe, my father, who was very much like into farming and rough life and all that. And she was shocked, by all the farm things, like animals dying and whatever. And she found it's a long story, sorry, antelope, a deer, a duiker mother killed in a trap, basically in the forest, and the baby was there. So she took the baby home, the little baby Bokkie, and she raised it from a very small baby with a bottle and everything. Its name was Bokkies, very original, and it basically became like a pet. But one day, Bokkies grew up and left, and he jumped out over the fence or whatever and ran away. Although he loved it there, he would eat from the vegetable patch. So what my mom did was, she just kept the gate open. Instead of trying to lock in Bokkies, she just left the gate open, hoping that Bokkies would come back. And after a few months, it was really interesting. she left the gate open, and she saw in the garden was Bokkies. Bokkies was actually a girl with a little male. Bokkies had brought him back to kind of show him whatever. So I think as a mother, you need to leave a door open. Leave a door open, but the children can come freely. Now, what I mean by leaving the door open, I mean you need to communicate to them that you love them, that you care for them. They're free, but they can always come when they need support or emotional support, and to remind them that they must come to you, but they're free to do it. So there's an open door where they can come in freely. Because if they feel like as soon as they come in, you're going to shut them in again and give them rules and, I think then they're going to not even come through the door again. So if that's the case. But sometimes, actually, I would say the best relationship parents can have with their children begins at 18. Because you have no more control over them. And so all of the things all the time you spend together is free, is freely chosen, really, because you can't control a 24-year-old anymore, generally. So I think now is actually the time to start to build new relationships with your sons. So that's my simple advice. I still have little ones, so yeah, but I can already feel it in my 9-year-old. It's a different relationship. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I think that's it, eh? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone, so much. Have a blessed evening, and I'll see you next week. Okay. God bless.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you,
Good night.
Father.
Thank you, Father.